I'm Norah, 34 years old, and Christmas used to be my favorite time of the year. The lights, the gifts, the warmth of family gatherings. That all changed when I overheard my mother's plan to humiliate me at our family Christmas party. After 2 years of building my life in New York away from her judgment, I never expected to walk into such betrayal. But what happened next changed everything between us forever. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself and healing family wounds. Growing up as Catherine Taylor's daughter was like living under a microscope. Everything I did was examined, criticized, and inevitably found lacking. My mother was the epitome of perfection. Her house was immaculate, her garden won awards, her dinner parties were legendary in our small Michigan town, and her expectations for her daughters were impossibly high. My older sister Amanda somehow managed to meet those expectations. She was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect life choices. She became a dentist, married a successful accountant named Tom, and produced two beautiful granddaughters for my mother to dote on. I, on the other hand, was the perpetual disappointment. Norah, stand up straight. Norah, that skirt is too short. Norah, why can't you be more like your sister? These phrases formed the soundtrack of my childhood. No matter how hard I tried, I could never quite measure up. Art was my escape. I would spend hours in my room sketching designs, dreaming of fabrics and silhouettes. When I announced my intention to study fashion design in college, my mother's face fell as if I'd told her I was joining the circus. "Fashion is a hobby, not a career," she said dismissively. "You need something practical to fall back on." But for once, I didn't listen. I applied to fashion programs behind her back, and when I got accepted to Parsons in New York, I took the leap. My father, Robert, secretly helped me with the initial rent for a tiny apartment I shared with 3 other students. He always had a soft spot for me, though he rarely stood up to my mother directly. The first years were hard. I worked multiple jobs while studying, barely sleeping, but loving every exhausting minute of it. After graduation, I interned at 3 different fashion houses before starting my own small line. Slowly, painfully slowly, my brand, Norah Taylor Designs, began to gain recognition for its sustainable practices and inclusive sizing. This past October, my designs were featured in a spread in Elle magazine. Not the cover, not a full feature, but a legitimate acknowledgement of my work in a major publication. It was the validation I'd been working toward for years. I sent a copy to my parents but never heard if they'd seen it. 2 years had passed since my last visit home. 2 years of focusing on my career, building a life in New York, surrounded by friends who actually valued me. 2 years of minimal contact with my mother, limited to brief, awkward phone calls on holidays and birthdays. Then came the call from my father in early December. "Norah, sweetheart, please come home for Christmas this year," he said, his voice tinged with that familiar, gentle pleading. "Your mother misses you. We all do." I doubted the part about my mother missing me, but I could hear the longing in my father's voice. Plus, I missed my nieces. Lily was 7 now, and Emma was 5. They knew me primarily through video calls and the custom dresses I sent for their birthdays. "I don't know, Dad," I hesitated. "Work is really busy right now." "Just for a week, he pressed. "Come a week before Christmas. Give us some time together before the holiday rush." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I arranged for my assistant to manage the studio, packed a suitcase with carefully selected outfits. I knew my mother would scrutinize every one, and boarded a plane to Detroit. As I drove the rental car through the familiar streets of my hometown, a sense of dread settled in my stomach. Nothing had changed. The same houses with the same Christmas decorations, the same shops along Main Street now with holiday displays in the windows, the same feeling that I didn't quite belong. Our house stood at the end of Maple Lane, a grand colonial with perfect symmetry and a meticulously maintained exterior. Every Christmas light hung with precision. The wreath on the door was a designer piece that probably cost more than most people's entire holiday decoration budget. It was beautiful and intimidating. just like my mother. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage. It's just a week, I whispered to myself. You can handle anything for a week. If only I had known what was waiting for me inside. I barely had my finger off the doorbell when the front door swung open. My father stood there, his face breaking into a genuine smile that warmed my heart despite my anxiety. "Norah," he exclaimed, pulling me into a bear hug. My father had always been physically affectionate, a trait my mother seemed to tolerate rather than share. "You look wonderful, sweetheart. New York agrees with you." Before I could respond, two small bodies barreled into my legs. "Aunt Norah! Aunt Norah!" Lily and Emma looked up at me with excitement. "Did you bring us presents?" I laughed, kneeling down to their level. "Maybe I did, but you'll have to wait until Christmas to find out." "Girls, give your aunt some space," came my sister's voice as Amanda appeared in the hallway. She looked the same as always. Perfectly highlighted hair, tasteful makeup, expensive but understated clothing. The Amanda uniform. Yet something in her eyes seemed different. Tired, perhaps, or resigned. She gave me a quick hug. "Good to see you, Norah. The girls have been counting down the days." "Where are your bags?" my father asked. "I'll bring them in." "Just this one and my carry-on," I said, gesturing to my luggage. I had packed light, planning to do laundry if needed, rather than bringing everything I might want for a week. "That's all you brought?" The cool voice came from behind Amanda. My mother stood in the doorway to the living room, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed slacks. Her critical gaze swept over me, taking in my travel outfit of black jeans, boots, and a chunky knit sweater of my own design. "Hello, Mother," I said, stepping forward to kiss her cheek. She allowed it, but didn't return the gesture. "I would have thought someone in fashion would travel with more options," she commented, "especially for the holidays." And there it was. Less than 30 seconds, and already a dig. Some things never changed. "Catherine, let Norah get settled before you start." My father said, his tone light, but with an underlying firmness I rarely heard from him. My mother's lips tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Amanda has prepared your old room. Dinner will be at 6 sharp. Tom will be joining us after he finishes at the office." As Amanda led me upstairs, I couldn't help but notice how the house was already perfectly decorated for Christmas. The grand staircase was wrapped in garland interspersed with white lights and red berries. The familiar scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. "She's been cleaning and decorating for weeks," Amanda said quietly as we reached the second floor. "The big Christmas party is on Christmas Eve this year." I groaned internally. The annual Taylor Christmas party was legendary in our social circle, an opportunity for my mother to show off her perfect home, perfect family, and perfect holiday spirit. It was always an elaborate affair with catered food, expensive decorations, and a carefully curated guest list of family friends and my mother's important social connections. "Who's coming?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Everyone," Amanda replied with a knowing look. "The usual family. Mom's church friends, Dad's colleagues. Oh, and Aunt Patrice is staying with us for the whole week. She arrived yesterday." Great. Aunt Patrice was my mother's older sister and equally judgmental. The two of them together were a formidable force of disapproval. My old bedroom had been converted to a guest room years ago, all traces of my teenage self removed and replaced with neutral tones and generic artwork. The only acknowledgement that it had once been mine was a small framed photo on the dresser of me at my high school graduation. "I'll let you get settled," Amanda said, hovering in the doorway. "For what it's worth, I'm really glad you came, Norah." Once alone, I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed and took a deep breath. The house felt the same. Too perfect. Too controlled. The kind of place where you're afraid to leave a water glass on a table without a coaster. I already felt the familiar pressure building in my chest. The pressure to conform, to please, to be someone I wasn't. That evening dinner was a tense affair, despite my father's attempts to keep conversation flowing. My mother asked pointed questions about my little fashion project, as she called it, while Aunt Patrice made comments about how the real world would eventually teach me about practical career choices. Tom, Amanda's husband, seemed uncomfortable with the dynamics, but said little. He was a quiet man who mostly nodded along with whatever Amanda or my mother said. The only bright spots were my nieces, who were excited to tell me about school and their Christmas wish lists. "We're expecting about 40 people for the Christmas Eve party," my mother announced as she served her perfectly prepared roast beef. "The Johnsons, the Michelsons, Pastor Gilbert and his wife. Oh, and several of my clients." My mother worked as an interior designer for wealthy families in the surrounding communities, including several from Detroit who had vacation homes in our area. "The Prescotts are coming as well." She continued, giving me a look I couldn't quite interpret. "You remember Diana Prescott, don't you, Norah? Her son Bradley will be joining them." My stomach dropped. Bradley Prescott was my ex-boyfriend from college. We dated briefly during my sophomore year when I came home for summer break. The relationship had ended spectacularly badly at another family gathering when he publicly criticized my career choice and broke up with me in front of everyone. It was humiliating, and I had always suspected my mother had encouraged him to do it. "That's nice," I managed to say, pushing food around my plate. "Bradley is doing very well," my mother continued. "He's a partner at his father's law firm now. Still single, too." Her implication was clear, and I fought the urge to roll my eyes. After dinner, I helped clear the table despite my mother's insistence that it wasn't necessary. I needed the escape to the kitchen away from the scrutiny. As I rinsed plates, I gazed out the window into the darkness, wondering how I would survive the next week. That night I tossed and turned in the too-perfect guest room. The mattress was too firm, the pillows too soft, and my mind too active with memories and anxieties. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of being on a runway with everyone laughing as my designs fell apart at the seams. The next morning I woke up early after a restless night. The house was quiet, and I decided to head downstairs for coffee before facing everyone. I was padding down the hallway in my pajamas and slippers when I heard voices from the sunroom, the small glass enclosed space off the kitchen where my mother often had her morning tea. "Are you sure about this, Catherine?" It was Aunt Patrice's voice, hushed but clear in the quiet house. "It seems rather harsh." "It's for her own good," my mother replied firmly. "She needs to face reality. This fashion designer fantasy has gone on long enough." I froze my hand on the banister. They were talking about me. "And the party is the perfect opportunity," my mother continued. "We'll humiliate her in front of everyone. It's time she learns her lesson." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't have heard that correctly. My own mother was planning to humiliate me. Deliberately, I brought the portfolio she sent us from her first year in design school. My mother said, her voice smug. "Those terrible sketches and that ridiculous collection she thought was so avant-garde. Everyone will see that she hasn't got any real talent." "What about the jewelry box?" Aunt Patrice asked. "That's the centerpiece," my mother replied. "I'll announce that I'm giving grandmother's jewelry box to Amanda. Everyone knows it was supposed to go to the daughter who would bring the most pride to the family name. Obviously, that's Amanda." The jewelry box in question was a beautiful antique piece that had belonged to my grandmother. She had been a talented seamstress who made clothes for many local families before marrying my grandfather. I had been close to her, and she had encouraged my love of fashion before her death when I was 15. She had always told me the box would be mine one day, as Amanda had already received her pearl necklace. "And you've invited Bradley, too," Aunt Patrice chuckled. "That's rather devious, Catherine." "Well, he was all too happy to help," my mother said. "He's going to talk about how impractical her career choices were even back then. Between that, the portfolio, and the jewelry box, she'll finally have to admit defeat and come back home where she belongs. Robert can find her a proper job at his company." I backed away silently, my heart pounding in my chest. Tears stung my eyes as I retreated to my room, careful not to make a sound. Once safely inside, I slid down against the door, my legs too weak to hold me. My own mother was planning to publicly humiliate me. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me given our history, but the calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. The Christmas party was still 5 days away, but she had been planning this for who knows how long. She had invited Bradley specifically to participate in my humiliation. She was going to use my grandmother's precious heirloom as a weapon. Waves of hurt crashed over me, followed by a surge of anger so intense it made me shake. I thought about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep after one of her cutting remarks. The way I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove her wrong about my career. The constant feeling that nothing I did would ever be good enough. I could leave, pack my bags and head back to New York before anyone else woke up. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was years of pent-up resentment, but I couldn't let her win. Not again. Not this time, I whispered to my reflection in the guest room mirror. My eyes were red but determined. This time I fight back. The question was how. Direct confrontation had never worked with my mother. She would deny everything, twist my words, make me seem paranoid or overly sensitive. No, I needed a different approach, something she wouldn't expect. As I showered and dressed for the day, an idea began to form. If my mother wanted to use my career as a weapon against me, I would show her exactly what that career had become. Not through arguments or defenses, but through irrefutable evidence of my success. It was time to take control of the narrative. I needed more information before I could finalize my plan. Over the next 2 days, I became a detective in my own family home, carefully gathering intelligence while maintaining a facade of oblivion. My first target was my father. That afternoon, I offered to help him hang the outdoor Christmas lights, an annual task he usually handled alone. "So, Dad," I said casually as I handed him strands of lights for the pine tree near our driveway, "Mom seems really excited about this Christmas party." He nodded, focusing on not tangling the wires. "You know your mother. Christmas is her Super Bowl. Seems like there are going to be a lot of people there. Anyone I should be especially nice to." I kept my tone light, curious, rather than suspicious. "Well, the Prescotts, of course," he said, unaware of how the name made my stomach clench. "Diana has referred several big clients to your mother this year. And the Blakemores are coming. He's the bank president, you know." "Fancy," I commented. "Mom must be pulling out all the stops." "She always does," he replied with a small sigh. Then in a lower voice, "Between you and me, I think she's been even more intense about it this year. She keeps talking about making some special announcements." "Oh," I tried to sound only mildly interested. "What kind of announcements?" "Not entirely sure," he admitted. "Something about family traditions and legacies. You know how she gets about that stuff." He didn't know then. My father wasn't part of the humiliation plan. That was something at least. Later that day, I was conscripted into cookie baking duty with Amanda and the girls. As Lily and Emma enthusiastically decorated sugar cookies with far too much frosting, I probed my sister gently. "So are you and Tom doing okay?" I asked, noticing again the fatigue around her eyes. Amanda glanced at her daughters to make sure they were absorbed in their task before responding quietly. "We're fine. It's just exhausting sometimes." "What is the girls?" "No, they're amazing." A genuine smile lit her face as she looked at her daughters. "It's everything else. Living up to expectations. Being the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Sometimes I just want to scream." I stared at her, surprised by the admission. "I always thought you had it all figured out. That being Mom's favorite was easy for you." She snorted softly. "Favorite comes with its own burden, trust me. At least you got to escape. I'm still here, still trying to measure up every day." "Is that why you became a dentist, to please Mom?" Amanda shrugged. "I don't even know anymore. Don't get me wrong, I like my job. But sometimes I wonder what I might have chosen if I'd had your courage." This was a side of my sister I'd never seen before. I'd always assumed she was as judgmental as our mother, that she looked down on my career choices. Maybe I'd been wrong. "Has Mom said anything about me lately?" I ventured. "About the magazine feature or my designs?" "She mentioned that you'd sent something," Amanda replied, carefully piping a border around a star-shaped cookie. "I asked to see it, but She said it wasn't worth the trouble. I looked it up online, though. Your stuff is really good, Norah. I've always thought so, even if I never said it. Thanks, I said, genuinely touched. That means a lot. Mom's been weird about you coming home, Amanda added, lowering her voice further as Emma approached for more sprinkles. Like she's been planning something. She and Aunt Patrice keep whispering together. And she asked me all these questions about whether I'd want Grandma's jewelry box. So Amanda wasn't in on the plan either. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. That evening during dinner, I noticed how my mother kept steering the conversation toward my early career struggles, clearly laying groundwork for her later humiliation. Remember that collection you did your sophomore year, Norah? She asked innocently as she passed the potatoes. The one with all the unusual color combinations. Vaguely, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. That was a learning experience. I still have your portfolio from those days, she continued. I came across it when I was cleaning recently. How nice, I said, meeting her eyes steadily. We all start somewhere. My mother seemed momentarily disconcerted by my lack of embarrassment. She quickly changed tactics. Bradley Prescott was asking about you when I ran into Diana at church. He's done very well for himself. Good for him, I said blandly. Please pass the salt. After dinner, while everyone was in the living room, I slipped away to the storage room off the kitchen, where my mother kept old photos and memorabilia. Sure enough, in a box labeled Norah School Projects, I found my old portfolio from sophomore year. It was exactly as I remembered. Ambitious, but unskilled. Full of technical mistakes and misjudgments in fabric choices. Evidence of a passionate beginner not yet possessing the skills to match her vision. Next to it was a folder of newspaper clippings about local fashion disasters and failed designer careers. My mother had been collecting ammunition for years. The final confirmation came the following morning when I overheard my mother on the phone, presumably with Bradley Prescott. Yes, it would be wonderful if you could mention how impractical fashion design seemed even back then, she was saying. Just a casual comment during conversation, nothing that seems pre-planned. Yes, I'm sure it will finally knock some sense into her. The party starts at 7. That settled it. The humiliation plan was definitely moving forward. But now so was mine. I needed allies and resources if my plan was going to work. My first step was to reconnect with old friends in town who might be willing to help me on short notice. I borrowed my father's car and drove to Main Street ostensibly to do some Christmas shopping. My real destination was Threads, a small boutique owned by my high school friend Jessica Morris. The shop window was decorated with a tasteful holiday display, and a bell jingled as I pushed open the door. Be right with you, called a voice from the back. Take your time, Jess, I replied, smiling as a blonde head popped up from behind the counter. Norah Taylor, Jessica exclaimed, rushing around to envelop me in a hug. Oh my God, when did you get back in town? Couple days ago. Here for the holidays. Jessica held me at arm's length, examining me. You look amazing. Very New York chic. I laughed. Thanks. So do you. The shop looks great. Doing all right for a small-town boutique, she said with pride. What brings you in? Besides my magnetic personality, of course. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. I need help, Jess. And it might be a little crazy. Over coffee in the small sitting area she'd created for bored husbands and tired shoppers, I explained my situation. I told her about overhearing my mother's plan about the public humiliation being arranged for the Christmas party. Jessica's expression darkened as I spoke. That's messed up, Norah. I mean, I always knew your mom was strict, but this is another level. Tell me about it, I sighed. So now I need to figure out how to counter her move without creating a huge scene. What are you thinking? I outlined my plan to Jessica. Instead of running away or confronting my mother directly, I wanted to showcase my actual success as a designer. To present evidence that would make her planned humiliation backfire completely. I need a place to display some of my work, I explained, and I need it to happen right before her big announcement at the party. Jessica's eyes lit up. You want to use my shop? We could set up a mini exhibition. Could we? I asked, hope blooming. It would just be for one night. I could have my team in New York overnight some samples and my lookbook. Are you kidding? This would be amazing publicity for Threads, Jessica said excitedly. I've been trying to bring in more unique pieces anyway. We could make it a whole thing, invite some of my regular customers. With Jessica on board, I immediately called my assistant in New York. Zoe was surprised to hear from me, but quickly caught on to the urgency of the situation. I need you to overnight the spring collection samples, I told her. The blue dress, the structured jacket, the pantsuit, and that evening gown we did for the Williams account. Plus all the press materials, the Elle feature, and the lookbook. On it, Zoe assured me. Anything else? The letter from Macy's about the capsule collection, I added. And maybe some of the customer testimonials. With that in motion, I returned to my parents' house to implement the next phase of my plan. I needed to find my old sketchbooks to show my progression as a designer. While everyone was busy with dinner preparations, I snuck up to the attic. The space was dusty but meticulously organized with labeled boxes. I found what I was looking for in a corner, a cardboard box marked Norah Art Projects. Inside were my earliest fashion sketches from middle school, high school art projects, and a fabric collage that had won a regional art contest. There was also a small wooden box containing scraps of fabric and buttons my grandmother had given me from her sewing room after she could no longer work with her arthritic hands. Most importantly, I found my college sketchbooks showing the progression of my skills from those sophomore attempts my mother planned to ridicule to my senior thesis collection that had earned me my first internship. The contrast was striking evidence of hard work, learning, and growth. As I was carefully repacking everything into a separate bag to take to Jessica's shop, I heard a throat clear behind me. I whirled around to find my father standing at the top of the attic stairs. "Doing some memory lane exploring?" he asked gently. "Something like that," I replied, trying to look casual despite my racing heart. He came further into the attic, eyes landing on the open box of my childhood art. "I always loved your drawings," he said, picking up an early fashion sketch I'd done at 13. "You had such vision even then." I was surprised by the comment. My father had never been openly critical of my career choices like my mother, but I'd always assumed he shared her practical mindset. "Really? You never said anything." He sighed, setting down the sketch carefully. "I should have. I should have said a lot of things over the years." He looked tired, suddenly older than his 60 years. "Your mother means well, Norah. She wants security for you, a life without struggles." "By controlling every aspect of my life?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "By planning to humiliate me at the Christmas party?" His head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" I hadn't meant to reveal that I knew, but now that it was out, I told him everything. About overhearing my mother and Aunt Patrice about the portfolio, about Bradley Prescott, about the jewelry box. My father listened in stunned silence. When I finished, he sat heavily on an old trunk, putting his head in his hands. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice rough. "I knew she was disappointed about your career choice, but this... Why has she always been this way with me, Dad?" I asked the question that had haunted me for years, finally finding voice. Why was I never good enough? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he did, his words surprised me. "Your mother wanted to be a designer too once," he said quietly. "What?" This was news to me. He nodded. "Before we met. She was quite talented, apparently. She had a scholarship to a design school in Chicago." "What happened?" "Her parents," he said simply. "They refused to let her go. Said it wasn't a proper career for a respectable young woman. That she'd never make a living at it. They forced her to attend the local college instead to study business." I tried to reconcile this information with the mother I knew. "She never told me." "She never tells anyone," my father replied. "I only know because her sister mentioned it once years ago. When you started showing interest in fashion, I think it brought up all those old wounds for her, all those dreams she gave up. So she tried to make me give up mine too." I asked, anger flaring again. I'm not excusing her behavior, he said quickly. What she's planning is wrong, deeply wrong. I'm just trying to help you understand. Sometimes the people who should support us the most are the ones still fighting their own battles. He looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I'm proud of you, Norah. I should have said that more often. I should have stood up for you. It's not too late, I said softly. No, he agreed, straightening his shoulders. It's not. As we descended from the attic, my father carrying the bag of sketchbooks for me, he asked, "What are you going to do?" I told him about my plan with Jessica about the exhibition of my current work that would counter my mother's showcase of my early failures. Need any help? He asked, a glint in his eye I'd rarely seen before. For the first time since arriving home, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Actually, yes. Yes, I do. The day of the Christmas Eve party arrived with a flurry of activity. My mother was in her element, directing caterers, adjusting decorations, and making sure every detail was perfect. She barely acknowledged my offers to help, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Just make sure you're presentable for this evening," she said, eyeing my casual daytime outfit with disapproval. "Wear something appropriate." The undercurrent was clear. She wanted me suitably dressed for my public humiliation. "Don't worry, Mother," I replied sweetly. "I know exactly what I'm wearing." Throughout the day, I made excuses to leave the house, shuttling between Jessica's boutique and my parents' home. My shipment from New York had arrived intact, and we spent hours setting up the impromptu exhibition in the back room of Threads. Jessica had cleared the space, brought in proper lighting, and created elegant display areas for each piece. My father had been true to his word about helping. He'd spoken with several family friends who would be attending the party, not revealing the full situation, but ensuring they would be supportive of a special surprise I had planned. He'd also arranged for transportation from the house to Jessica's boutique for anyone interested in seeing my work after my announcement. By 6 o'clock, I was back at the house getting ready for the party. I chose my outfit carefully, a dress of my own design from my most recent collection. It was elegant but bold, a deep emerald green that complemented my coloring perfectly. The silhouette was classic with modern details that made it uniquely mine. I styled my hair in loose waves, applied makeup that was polished but not overdone, and added just one piece of jewelry, a vintage brooch my grandmother had given me before she died. When I descended the stairs, conversations paused as heads turned in my direction. My father beamed with pride. My nieces gasped and declared me a princess, and even Amanda looked impressed. "You look beautiful," she whispered, as I reached the bottom of the stairs. My mother's reaction was more complex. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as she took in the quality and style of my dress. For just a moment, I thought I saw something like genuine admiration in her expression, before it was quickly masked with her usual cool assessment. "That's certainly noticeable," she said, managing to make it sound like both a compliment and a criticism. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I designed and made it myself." The party began promptly at 7. Guests arrived in a steady stream, filling our home with chatter, laughter, and the rustle of expensive fabrics. I circulated graciously, reconnecting with old acquaintances and meeting my mother's important clients. All the while, I was acutely aware of her watching me, waiting for her moment. Aunt Patrice stayed close to my mother, the two of them occasionally exchanging whispers behind hands or wine glasses. Once or twice, I caught them looking at me with expressions that might have intimidated the old Norah. But I was not that insecure girl anymore. Bradley Prescott arrived with his parents around 8. He had aged not entirely well, with a receding hairline and a paunch that his expensive suit couldn't quite disguise. He made his way directly to me, all false charm and condescension. "Norah," he said, kissing my cheek without permission. "You look interesting. Still doing that fashion thing?" "Bradley," I replied coolly, stepping back. "Yes, I'm still doing that fashion thing. Quite successfully, in fact." He laughed as if I'd told a joke. "Well, good for you. Not everyone needs a traditional career, I suppose." I smiled, not rising to the bait. How kind of you to say. If you'll excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with. As the evening progressed, I could sense my mother growing increasingly smug. She kept glancing at the antique clock on the mantel, obviously counting down to her planned announcement. I caught her disappearing into her study briefly and returning with what looked like my old portfolio tucked under her arm. Jessica arrived at 9:30 right on schedule, giving me a subtle thumbs up as she entered. My other allies were in place as well. All the pieces were set for the confrontation to come. At 10 o'clock, my mother called for everyone's attention by tapping a spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The room gradually quieted as nearly 40 guests turned to face her. Friends and family, she began, her voice carrying that perfect hostess tone of warmth and authority. Thank you all for joining us for our annual Christmas celebration. It means so much to have you here in our home. She went on to talk about the importance of family traditions and values, her words seemingly heartfelt, but laced with the setup for what was to come. I stood calmly near the fireplace, watching her performance with clear eyes, perhaps for the first time in my life. As many of you know, she continued, her gaze finding me in the crowd. Family legacy is extremely important to me, passing down not just objects but values. The value of practical choices, of stability, of making one's family proud. There it was, the beginning of the attack. Some paths bring honor to a family name, she said, her voice taking on an edge. And some, well, some are more about self-indulgence. A few people shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building. I've always believed in encouraging my daughters to reach their full potential, my mother continued, to make choices that reflect well on themselves and their upbringing. She gestured to Amanda. My eldest, Amanda, has built a respected dental practice, married well, and given us beautiful grandchildren. Amanda's smile looked strained. Tom squeezed her hand supportively. And then there's Norah, my mother said, her voice changing subtly, who has spent the last several years pursuing her fashion interests in New York. She reached for the portfolio she'd placed on a side table. I recently rediscovered some of Norah's early work. I thought it might be enlightening to share with you all the kind of, shall we say, foundation she's building her dreams upon. This was it. The moment she had planned for my public humiliation. The room had gone completely silent, the atmosphere thick with discomfort and anticipation. Before she could open the portfolio, I stepped forward into the center of the room. Actually, Mother, I said, my voice clear and steady despite my racing heart, I'd be happy to show everyone my work. All of my work. She faltered clearly, not expecting me to volunteer for my own humiliation. Well, yes, this is from your sophomore year at college, I believe. Yes, I agreed pleasantly. Those are some of my earliest attempts at design. We all start somewhere, don't we? But perhaps before you show those, I should thank you. Thank me? She looked genuinely confused. Yes, I said, addressing both her and the room. I want to thank you for pushing me to be better, for setting such high standards. You taught me to be persistent, to never settle for mediocrity. And while we may have had our differences about my career path, those lessons served me well. I turned to the gathered guests. What my mother may not have mentioned is where that early work led. Jessica, on cue, Jessica stepped forward with a portfolio of her own. Unlike my mother's collection of my amateur work, this contained professional photographs of my current designs, magazine features, and press clippings. For those who haven't been following fashion news, Jessica said, opening the portfolio for people to see, Norah's designs were featured in Elle magazine this fall. Her sustainable approach to luxury fashion has been praised by industry leaders, and she's just signed a deal for a capsule collection with Macy's. Murmurs of interest and appreciation rippled through the room. My mother stood frozen, the old portfolio clutched in her hands. In fact, I continued smoothly, I'm excited to announce that I'll be opening a small satellite studio right here in town, creating jobs and bringing a piece of my New York business back home. Jessica's boutique threads will be carrying my designs exclusively in this region. This was news even to Jessica, whose eyes widened with delighted surprise. It was a decision I'd made only yesterday, but one that felt right. a way to bridge my new life with my roots. For anyone interested, I added, Jessica has set up a small exhibition of my current collection at her shop. My father has arranged for a shuttle service for anyone who'd like to see it after the party. My mother's face had gone pale, then flushed with color. The carefully orchestrated humiliation was falling apart before her eyes. But I wasn't finished. And Bradley. I turned to my ex-boyfriend, who was suddenly finding his drink extremely interesting. Thank you for your concern about my impractical career choices. My impractical little's business grossed just over $700,000 this year, with projections to break $1 million next year. But you're right. Not everyone needs a traditional career. There were a few chuckles at that, and Bradley had the grace to look embarrassed. I approached my mother, who seemed rooted to the spot. The portfolio you're holding shows where I started, not where I am now. We're allowed to grow, to improve, to evolve past our beginnings. I would have happily shared my journey with you if you'd been interested. I kept my voice gentle, aware that everyone was watching but needing to say the words. I never needed you to approve of my choices, Mother. I just needed you to accept that they were mine to make. For a moment I thought she might lash out or deny everything. Instead, something unexpected happened. Her eyes filled with tears. Catherine Taylor, who never showed vulnerability in public, was on the verge of crying in front of her carefully cultivated social circle. I believe you were also planning to make an announcement about grandmother's jewelry box, I said quietly, just between us. Perhaps that can wait for a more private moment. Amanda stepped forward, then apparently having pieced together what was happening. Mom, she said firmly, I've never wanted Grandma's jewelry box. We all know it was meant for Norah. She's the one who inherited Grandma's talent and passion. My mother looked between us, her carefully constructed plan in ruins. For the first time in my memory, she seemed at a loss for words. My father saved the moment, stepping smoothly into the awkward silence. I think this calls for a toast, he announced, raising his glass. To both our daughters, each successful in her own way, and to new beginnings. People gratefully raised their glasses, relieved to move past the tension. Conversations resumed, and many guests approached me with genuine interest in my work. Several of my mother's important clients expressed interest in visiting the exhibition at Jessica's boutique. Throughout it all, my mother remained subdued, watching from the periphery, as I was surrounded by the very people she'd intended to witness my humiliation. Instead, they were congratulating me, asking questions about my designs, interested in my success. It wasn't until much later, after many guests had departed for the exhibition, and others had started to leave, that my mother and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. She was methodically wrapping leftover desserts, her movements precise despite the emotional evening. Why didn't you tell me, she asked finally, not looking up from her task. About the magazine. About Macy's. I sent you the magazine, I replied. You never mentioned receiving it. Her hands stilled. I thought it was just, I didn't realize it was important. Would it have changed anything if you had? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, Your father told you about my design school scholarship, didn't he? I nodded, though she wasn't looking at me. It was a different time, she said softly. Different expectations. I know. I wanted to protect you from disappointment. Did you? I asked. Or did you want to protect yourself from watching me live the life you didn't get to have? Her sharp intake of breath told me the barb had landed. But I hadn't said it to wound her, only to speak a truth that had gone unacknowledged for too long. I'm good at what I do, Mother, I said gently. Really good. I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I see that now, she admitted, finally meeting my eyes. There was something new in her expression. Not quite pride, not yet, but perhaps the beginnings of respect. She opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box intricately carved with flowers and vines. My grandmother's jewelry box. She placed it on the counter between us. This should have been yours years ago, she said quietly. I just couldn't. I couldn't bear to see you follow a path that had brought me such pain. Your path brought you pain because it was taken from you, I replied. Mine brings me joy because I chose it. She nodded slowly, pushing the box toward me. Take it. It belongs with you in New York. It wasn't an apology. Catherine Taylor might never be capable of a true apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a small step toward acceptance. And for now, that was enough. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the fresh snowfall from overnight transforming the world outside into a perfect holiday postcard. The atmosphere in the house was different too. Lighter somehow, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. My mother was still my mother. She fussed over the Christmas breakfast preparation, insisted we all dress nicely for gift opening, and maintained her standards of perfection. But there was a subtle shift in her interactions with me. Less criticism, more careful observation. Once or twice I caught her looking at my dress from the party where it hung in the guest room, her expression thoughtful. The gift exchange was the usual controlled chaos, with Lily and Emma tearing into packages, while the adults sipped coffee and took turns opening their presents. I had brought carefully selected gifts for everyone: a custom leather portfolio for my father, a spa package for Amanda, science kits for the girls, a rare first edition cookbook for Tom, who secretly loved to bake. For my mother, I had designed and made a cashmere wrap in her favorite shade of blue with subtle detailing that echoed her preferred aesthetic. When she opened it, her fingers traced the fine stitching, the expert construction. "You made this?" she asked, her voice unusually quiet. "I did," I confirmed. "Every stitch." She draped it around her shoulders without further comment, but she wore it all day. My own gifts were the usual practical items from my mother: an expensive but conventional sweater set, thoughtful books from my father, and handmade cards from my nieces. Amanda and Tom gave me a beautiful leather sketchbook. After the presents were opened and breakfast consumed, I took my nieces aside and presented them with an additional surprise: 2 small garment bags containing special dresses I had designed just for them. "These are Norah Taylor originals," I told them as they squealed with delight. "Custom made for the 2 most important fashionistas I know." As they rushed to try on their dresses, Lily turned back to ask, "Does this mean we can tell our friends our aunt is famous?" I laughed. "I wouldn't go that far, sweetie, but you can definitely say your aunt makes pretty dresses for a living." "That's basically famous," Emma declared confidently, and I didn't contradict her. Later that afternoon, as the girls napped, and Tom and Amanda went to visit his parents briefly, I found myself in the living room with both my parents. My father was going through old photo albums, a Christmas tradition I had almost forgotten. "Look at this one," he said, holding up a photo of me at about 7 wearing a homemade princess costume, complete with a crown made of pipe cleaners and aluminum foil. "You were designing even then." I smiled at the memory. I was so proud of that costume. I refused to take it off for 3 days. To my surprise, my mother settled on the couch beside me, looking at the photo. "You made that crown yourself," she said. "I wanted to help, but you insisted on doing it all alone." "I was a stubborn child," I admitted. "You were independent," she corrected. "Always knew what you wanted." Coming from her, it almost sounded like a compliment. My father found another photo, this one of me and my grandmother sitting at her old sewing machine. "This was the summer she taught you to sew, wasn't it?" I nodded, throat suddenly tight with emotion. She was so patient. Remember how she let me use her good fabric for that disastrous skirt attempt? "She believed in you," my father said simply. My mother was quiet for a moment, then said, "She would be proud of you, your grandmother. She always said you had the eye." The words hung in the air between us, perhaps the closest thing to approval my mother had ever offered regarding my career. I let them settle, accepting them for what they were: a beginning, not an end. "Thank you," I said finally. We continued looking through photos, the 3 of us sharing memories that had long gone unspoken. There were still tensions, still years of hurt and misunderstanding between my mother and me. One evening couldn't erase all that, but something had shifted, a door had opened just a crack. As I packed my bags the next day, preparing to return to New York, I placed my grandmother's jewelry box carefully among my belongings. It would sit on my desk in my studio, a reminder of where I came from and how far I'd traveled. My mother came to my room as I was zipping my suitcase. She hovered in the doorway, uncharacteristically hesitant. "When will you be back?" she asked. "For the satellite studio opening." "Probably in February," I replied. "I'll need to find a space hire staff." She nodded. If you'd like suggestions on locations, I know several property owners." It was an olive branch offered awkwardly but genuinely. "I'd appreciate that," I said. Another silence then. "Your dress, the one you wore to the party. It was beautiful, Norah. Truly beautiful." The words clearly cost her something to say, and I recognized the effort behind them. "Thank you, Mother." As I drove away from my childhood home that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved or healed, but because for the first time I had stood in my truth without apology. I had refused to be diminished or humiliated. I had shown my mother, and perhaps more importantly myself, exactly who I had become. Sometimes family wounds don't heal completely. Sometimes the best we can hope for is that they scab over, leaving scars that remind us of our resilience rather than our pain. My relationship with my mother would likely always be complicated, but now it had the potential to evolve into something new. That Christmas, I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean cutting ties or burning bridges. Sometimes it means building new paths, ones strong enough to carry both your history and your future. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't believe in you? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be proud of their own path, even if others don't understand it. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important approval will always be your own.